Welcome to CAM Radio, an Ahead of the Curve initiative by Cyril Mangaldas, bringing you every Friday the latest in legal and policy. Stay tuned. Enjoy listening.
Welcome, everyone. We have recorded this a little in advance of Women's Day, but with the intention to play it out on Women's Day, which also happens to be Mahashivratri. Now, I think as all of us know, one of the foremost students and authors on Shiva has been a celebrated author, Amish Tripathi, and we couldn't have found anyone better to talk about a number of themes that are relevant for today's subject. So Amish is easily one of the most well-recognized contemporary Indian authors. He's made mythology accessible to young India and has carved out his niche in Indian literary landscape by imparting valuable lessons from history and mythology in a way that's both intriguing and comprehensive. And it also it's very relevant for folks in leadership positions. And whilst his books are abundant with learnings, Amish's journey, his own journey is inspiring. He's an example of not only follow your passion, but doing it well. He's worn many hats across his career, from an IIM graduate to a banker, a diplomat, and an author, and has fulfilled all these roles with humility and knowledge. So in today's conversation, wide-ranging conversation, we're going to talk about a number of issues which are relevant on Women's Day. We talk about Shiva. I want to talk about Sita as well. Amish has just come back recently from the Ayodhya event, and I have a number of questions regarding that as well with him. So let me start off with the first one. Amish, according to the chronology of your books, you started with the Shiva trilogy. And these are amongst your most well-known works. And it's commendable how you've taken this complex character and his story and portrayed it in a manner that is both relatable, honest, and truly creative. What prompted you to write this trilogy, and what was your source of inspiration?
The Shiva trilogy began actually as a pure philosophy thesis. My family and I were discussing, and we were watching TV once, and we discovered something interesting. That for the Zoroastrian Persians, that is, the ancestors of the Muslim Iranians now. For the Zoroastrian Persians, gods were called Ahuras and demons were called, or anti-gods. Demons is a very loaded word. The anti-gods were Daivas, which is interesting because it's the exact opposite of the Indian pantheon. Among the Indians, the gods were called Devas and the anti-gods were called Asuras. In the Avastan, which is the ancient Persian language, they couldn't pronounce Sir. Sir would become Her. So which is why Sindhu became Hindu for them. So Asura became Ahura. And which triggered an interesting debate in our family that if the ancient Indians and ancient Persians had met, would we be calling each other evil? Because my God is your anti-God, your God is my anti-God. Who would be right? And the obvious answer is neither. But they're just two different points of view. And at least in the traditional Indian and the Zoroastrian Persian way, there were no simplistic binaries. Our ancestors were much more nuanced, much more wise. They saw things in shades of gray. This binary concept of black, white, good, evil is a relatively modern concept, relatively as in the last 1500, 2000 years. So then what would be evil if neither of us are evil? We're just two different points of view. And an answer occurred to me that maybe evil is something that exists beyond petty human rivalries. So that was actually the heart of the Shiva trilogy, an answer to this question, what is evil? And an adventure developed to convey that philosophy, the Shiva trilogy. And the Ramchandra series, my new series, is a 1500-year prequel to the events of the Shiva trilogy that explores another philosophical question. But this is actually how it began, a pure philosophy thesis.
Oh, wonderful. And a great perspective also in terms of how different civilizations have evolved their points of view. And I'm going to come back to that in terms of what does 2024 mean in terms of kind of a civilizational moment. Moving on, I want to take one of your favorite characters, Shiva. And what stayed with me in the narrative was Har Har Mahadev, which means that there is Mahadev in every one of us.
Mm.
And I think this is true. And you described Shiva as someone who is great, but is also very stubborn. He has vices. He holds both good and evil in him. He wears serpents. He has ash on his body. And on the other hand, he is so generous, as they say, Jai Bholenath, and he gives away boons to everyone. And he's the kind of the ultimate source of purity. So I think Shiva has the power to go down the right path and transcend into greatness, and like for all of us as well. So he's not a perfect character, and neither are we. And in the book on the Oath of the Vayuputras, you've written, we become gods when we realize that as part of the universal divinity lives within us, when we understand our role in this great world, and when we strive to fulfill that role. Can you elaborate on this? Because this is such a relevant concept for all of us. I think we all know that we are full of both good and a lot of imperfections as well.
Mm.
How do we relate to Shiva?
Cyril, there's a philosophical grounding to this that comes from the Indian tradition. So Lord Shiva is seen in the Nirgun Nirakar form in the Indian tradition, which exists outside of the universe. And that is, of course, he's Anadi, he's perfect. But there are interpretations where Lord Shiva has taken a form as well. And in that, like there are some of us Shaivites and even Shaktas, Mother Goddess worshippers, who eat meat, right? Or drink alcohol. And, this is in some cases considered a vice. But there are temples in Nepal to
Yes.
Lord Shiva, even in India, where the prasad offered is actually meat and alcohol. And part of the Shaivite tradition is if it exists in the universe, which means Lord Shiva has created it, then how can it be evil? What becomes evil is if you do excess of it. So 8 billion of us eating meat every day will destroy the planet. That's not sustainable. So should a large number of us, if we don't need it, should we be vegetarian? Yes, it is in that sense better for the world, because then the world will be sustainable. But there are some, say there's a soldier, there's a sportsman. Now in today's day, you get whey protein, right? Vegetarian whey protein. In ancient times, you didn't. How do you get high quality protein? Through meat. If you're a soldier, what do? Right? So you try and do as little damage to the universe as you can. And this building up from this actually goes into what the Indian concept of divinity is. That actually it's all in your hands. It's not that an external God will come and judge you on who's right and who's wrong, and you'll go to heaven and you'll go to hell. In the ancient Indian way, there is no permanent hell. There's only this earth, and we come back again and again in the cycle of rebirths until we discover the divine within, and then we become God. So the journey is an individual journey for us to discover the divine within. And this concept is reinforced repeatedly. And of course, there's a Har Har Mahadev speech in Immortals of Melua, which many have spoken of. But Cyril, all of us know this, right? This word, this gesture is namaste. And many Westerners, and in fact, sadly, a few Indians as well, translate namaste as just as hello. That's what they think it means. That's it's not an incorrect translation, but it's an incomplete translation. Because namaste actually is from a Sanskrit conjoined, and it actually translates as I bow to the divine within you.
Yes.
That's what namaste is actually supposed to mean. And again, we are recognizing that there's all of us, that there's divine within all of us, right? You'll notice we do namaste or we do pranam to rivers, to mountains, to animals, right? Why? Because we are recognizing the divine in them as well. So this is a traditional Indian concept, and I find this very empowering. So we are not powerless children where a father like God will come and judge us. No, we are gods. We just don't know it yet, but we are gods, right? And this should not be a statement of ego. It should be a statement of positivity and a challenge to ourselves. Discover the divine within.
Right.
That's the journey.
Beautifully put. Moving on again on Shiva. Now, one of the most fascinating faces of Shiva is him as a leader. And throughout his life, he is faced with several challenges: safety and well being of his people, taking tough decisions that have far reaching impacts. Sometimes he has to destroy the world to set it. And even whilst he's figuring out his life, he has a strong sense of responsibility to his people. And this is something he doesn't get enough credit for. Now, even in today's world, a lot of leaders are themselves swallowing and holding the poison in their throats. And this is actually one of the favorite quotes I personally use when I talk to the firm as well. Is the job of every leader is to have 1 ounce of poison every day, so that others can thrive. Now, you've also been in the corporate world as well. What are some of the parallels that you witnessed in modern day leadership and the story of Shiva?
There are so many. One is giving a sense of ownership and unity to your people, which Lord Shiva does so well through the series, as you'll find, how he forges an army together, how he forges his followers together, how he instills confidence in them. That's what leadership is. Leadership is not you doing everything yourself and pressing your team down, because then you're just an individual, right? A leader is someone who raises his team, who instills confidence in them, who brings out the best that they can be. And one of the things that I found extremely interesting as the character of Lord Shiva developed in the book series, he doesn't expect everyone to be the same. It's one of the things, I've been in the corporate world and I realized the way the year-end evaluation is done. These are your strengths, these are your weaknesses. Work on these weaknesses, work on these strengths. One of the things that perhaps we don't realize is each human being is actually an entire package, right? So, for example, I am a disciplined guy who works methodically. I wake up early. I sleep early. I'm very conscious of my paperwork. Now those are my strengths. Now there's a area of improvement that comes as a package deal with this. What that means is I'm not the greatest of socializers, right? Because I don't like going out till late. I mean, if there's work, if there's something, I don't mind doing it, and particularly if it's a small gathering, then I don't mind. Big things, I'm I'm uncomfortable, right? Unless one has to go up on stage and speak. Now, this comes as a part of the package deal of the kind of person that I am. Now, if you tell me socialize more, actually, I might lose my strength as well,
Yes.
right? And this is one of the things that I've seen having been in the corporate world, that we want to put everyone on the same paradigm. These are your list of strengths, these are your
One size
weaknesses.
fits all.
Exactly. And human beings are not a are not a balance sheet. We're actually a package deal. It's one of the things one of the things we don't realize even in our individual relationships, So say for example, there's a marriage where the husband and wife expect the other to work very hard and earn tons of money. A part that comes with the package deal is the man or the woman will be a workaholic. What that means, you may not have as much me time. Now, that's a part of the package deal. You can't say, I want you to earn tons of money, but I want you to spend all your time with me also. It's a contradiction, right? Yeah. It's one of the things that you notice the way Lord Shiva, built up his team, because he knew this one is good for this one is good for that. And he doesn't try and fit everyone onto one system, tries to make them the best that they can be and have complementarities. Maybe that's a good leadership lesson.
One of the things also, can you talk a little bit about his ability to swallow poison?
No doubt about that. Look, I think one of the greatest tasks of a leader, and I think it was Acharya Chanakya who said that a good leader is one who will hurt his own soul for the good of his people. Okay, and it's a very deep philosophy if you think about it. There are ways where you can hurt yourself materially or anything, but hurting your own soul is like taking bad karma on yourself for the good of your people. When you know you'll be punished for that bad karma, right? And that's what a leader is supposed to do in the Indian way. Leadership is a responsibility. It's not like a right of power or something. It's a responsibility. If you're a leader, you have greater work to do. You need to make greater sacrifices. And if we understand that, then actually, if you think about it, even the people who work for that team will work a lot harder. It's of course what Lord Shiva does literally
Yes,
in the Shiva trilogy. But if you see the way the Indian army is organized as well, and I think it comes from our tradition, unlike many other armies, where the which whoever's the commanding officer in the platoon or the thing doesn't lead from the front, they normally send their soldiers up and they direct the thing. In the Indian way, you'll notice the officers lead from the front, which is why it's one of the very intriguing things about the Indian army. The officer soldier ratio of casualties is very high. Unlike in other armies, where the officer casualties are usually low, it's the soldiers who get killed or injured. Now, what does this do? Think about it, what it does on the soldier. He says, my boss is running ahead of me. He's taking more risk than me. I can do this. Right. So you lead by example. That's what actually swallowing poison is. So if
yes,
you expect your team to work 10 hours a day, you should work 14 hours a day. Uh, if you expect your team to make sacrifices, you need to make more sacrifices. If there's, and we saw that in some companies, like for example, Tata's, I think the Tata Group did it.
yes,
During the COVID times, I think some of the companies they had to restructure, cut a bit of pay. The bosses took a bigger cut of pay,
yes,
right? What that shows to the people is that if I expect a sacrifice from you, I will drink poison and make a bigger sacrifice. That makes your team want to give their all into it. It
yes,
shouldn't be like, I mean, I was in a bank, Cyril, and Indian banks are relatively more conservatively regulated, but you know what Western banks are like. I won't go into which
yeah,
companies, etc. But the way some of the Western top bankers, when the financial crisis happened in 2008, which a lot of it was caused by the banks themselves.
yes, absolutely.
People lost their jobs within the banks themselves, but the top bosses gave themselves, super
Good.
bonuses. Is that right? Is that dharma?
Yeah.
No.
And that is exactly where they should have actually swallowed the poison, but they did.
Exactly. That the employee should not have lost their jobs. They should have taken zero pay for 2 years. That is what a good leader does. And then people will literally die for that leader, like soldiers in the Indian army do.
Absolutely. So lots and lots of lessons from that, and maybe sometime we'll have a more deeper chat in terms of the lessons from Shiva's life. Let me now, me recognizing this is a Women's Day event, let me move on to some interesting female characters in our mythology. So on the one, and this is a contradiction which I wanted to help me understand. So on the one hand, we have fearless warriors like Kali and Durga, very strong characters, fierce as well. And on the other hand, at least the archetype of Sita and Parvati, who are often portrayed as kind of meek and obedient. Now, I know that you have a different point of view on that, but let's just now go by the stereotype that we've all been conditioned to think about as Sita is somebody who needs to be rescued and protected, whereas on the other hand, you have these strong characters. What are the reasons for these kind of perception discrepancies, and how do you address them in a contemporary, as a contemporary writer? In your works, you've of course written about your women characters to be very strong and very accomplished and very self-confident as well. So, can you help me understand the contradiction? Because this is a very relevant thing for
Sure.
women today. And as a firm, we are majority women, including at the senior leadership. Every one of them has a distinct identity and a way of looking at things. Some of them are go-getters. They're kind of the more the Kali Durga variety, and they take the bull by the horns. And some are the kind of low-key, more long-shot strategies type of. So we have all kinds of. And considering that this is Women's Day and we need to celebrate all of them because there are even some silent superheroines as well, and are forging their own paths. But back to the mythology, how do you explain that Indian mythology has these vastly contrasting women stereotypes?
Firstly, thank you for the compliments on the way women characters have been shown in my books. And I would love to take credit that, I have created this, because then I'm sure Many of your employees, the female ones, would think like that. I'm a nice, cool guy. But that would be wrong, because actually I didn't create this archetype. These archetypes of strong women actually come from our ancient traditions. So the question arises, which you asked very rightly, that Sita Ma is shown as docile, perhaps even submissive. Where did this archetype come from? The image that we have of Goddess Sita, of Goddess Parvati, comes to us from, at least in the modern urban India, largely from television serials of the 1980s and early 1990s. These television serials, their source material were actually texts that were written in the post medieval or late medieval age. So, for example, the Ramayana television serial, I'm not deriding it, it was a very good
Yeah, it was very
TV series. Ramanan Sagarji did a wonderful job, but most of the source material for the television serial was Goswami Tulsidas ji's Ramcharit Manas, which was written in the 16th century. This is just one example. There are many examples like. You'll find that texts are spiritual and story and religious texts which were written from the 12th century onwards. You find that the status of women is a little lower, right? And it appears much more patriarchal, very different from the ancient versions. So, my Sita Warrior of Mithila is actually based on an ancient version of the Ramayana, also credited to the original author Valmiki ji. It's a version of the Ramayana called the Adbhut Ramayana, in which Sita Ma is a warrior,
yes.
and she's the one who kills Ravan. And there's a very ancient version of the Ramayana. It was very popular in ancient times, but it's been forgotten now. The original Valmiki Ramayana, also, Goddess Sita is actually very strong, right? She's not a warrior, but she's a very strong, independent-minded woman.
She takes her own decisions. She decides that if she
In the
wants to
Valmiki
remain here,
Ramayana,
and
absolutely.
if she wants to, if she has to cross the Lakshman Rekha, so be it.
So
She
it's
decides that she doesn't want to go back
Yeah.
with Hanuman.
And in fact, Cyril, in the original Valmiki Ramayana, there is no Lakshman Rekha at all. Actually, it's not even
Yes.
there,
Yes.
right? There are the Rig Veda, which is our most ancient scripture, has hymns written by women and rishis and
Yeah,
rishis,
Rikikas.
essentially the equivalent of the Middle Eastern prophets and messiahs. We had the equivalent of women prophets and messiahs in ancient times. Their hymns are there in our religious scriptures. There's a thing I've said very often. There are idiots who say today that women should not read the scriptures at certain times of month, to certain times of the month. And our answer to them should be, you moron, our ancestors, the women wrote our scriptures. Forget about reading the scriptures. They wrote them, right? We had women who ruled in their own name. We had women who founded universities. Any Gujaratis in your in your office would have heard of the Vallabhi University. It was an ancient university.
Yes.
It was founded by a woman, whatever, 1500, 2000 years ago. That was the archetype that we had in India of the.
One of the things which Vandana and I do as a family is we have a strong relationship with the Somerville College at Oxford, which is all women's college.
Wonderful. So this is actually, those who fight for equality or treating men and women as equal are not being westernized in any way. They are actually being truly Indian, right? That's the way to understand it. Having said that, why did these medieval era scriptures emerge? You'll notice any society which suffers a lot of invasions and random violence tends to become patriarchal. Uh, so Syria, for example, actually among the Middle Eastern cultures, used to be among the most equal societies between men and women. Even the Kurds in that area, for example. But as it has suffered random violence over the last few decades, you'll notice the society has become more patriarchal. Even in India, you'll find that the parts of India which suffered a lot more invasions and violence, like Northwest India, are much more patriarchal. The parts of
Yes.
India which suffered the least in terms of the invasions of the Turks and the
Yes.
Europeans, like South India, are actually much less patriarchal. Or
And in
Northeast India,
Kerala,
much less
they're
patriarchal.
matriarchal.
Yeah. So it's like a natural thing that happens. You'll find it across societies. A lot of random violence, society tends to become patriarchal because women can compete with men in everything except on violence. Because on average, men are bigger, tougher. It's just the thing of testosterone. I mean, it's just the way it is, right?
Yeah.
And this tends to happen in society. So, my thing also is that post 1947, we've actually been we are actually among the most peaceful societies on earth now. So, there's no reason to carry on with what we suffered in the last 1,000 years. We can now go back to our ancient way, and we must revive that and treat men and women as equal.
Now, without giving it any religious overtone, can we talk about Sita as an example of Indian feminism? Because just to build on what we just said, that she's been considered a pativrata or obedient, but there is much more to her, and she's actually a shining example of feminine courage and one of the defining figures of Indian womanhood. She had spiritual strength and intellectual conviction. She, at crucial points of the Ramayana, she makes important decisions, including the decision to accompany Ram to the forest.
She brought her children up by herself.
Yes, brought the children up by herself. Decides not to leave Ashok Vatika and come back with a free ride with Hanuman, but she decides to stay there and make a fight of it with Ravan. So she takes the decision that she wants, and she sometimes kind of also. In olden, there is an example of where sometimes you can take a wrong decision, but it's her decision.
Yeah.
So, just to build again on your comment on Western cultures, so Indian feminism and masculinity never went to the Western extreme. In the West, feminism means hatred of masculinity.
Absolutely.
Or masculine spirit means hatred of women. But in India, that is not so. In India, men and women work in partnership. So how do we explain that?
Cyril, very, very insightful question. And this is one of the things I have seen in the West. I lived in London for a little over 4.5 years. There are lots that we can learn from the West. They've been the most successful culture of the last 300, 400 years. There's a lot that we can learn from the West. One of the things, however, that we should seek to avoid is the tendency of the West to swing from one extreme to the other and then back again to this extreme. They simply don't understand the concept of balance. And this shows in everything, right? So there was a time when they believed that liberal democracy is so good, their version of liberal democracy, that they need to invade various countries in the Middle East and kill a few million people for the good of those very people. And all of us who are kind of third world brown skinned people are like tearing our hair out. What the hell are you doing? And I have actually had raging debates. I know, okay, I don't really rage, I'm relatively calm, but strong debates with friends of mine, white friends of mine in London in think tanks who are all saying, actually, the invasion of Libya was a good idea. It was just badly executed. Actually, the invasion of Syria or Iraq was a good idea. It was just badly executed. We could have converted it. And I was like, who the hell told you to go into those societies? They will decide, know what they want to do, right? Now, I've noticed this in the West. They just swing from one extreme to the other. They simply don't understand balance, right? So there was a time when the men would control everything, right? And then there was a reaction to that, and it went to the feminist movement where it meant hatred of all men. Now it has swung to the other extreme where there are transgenders, which means hatred of all women, right?
Yes.
They simply don't understand the concept of balance. That's one of the things we Indians actually, one of our core Sanskrit Mahavakyas, Ati Sarvatra Varjayit, extremism of any kind should be avoided. So you can be a strong man, you can be a strong woman, you can be a strong transgender. Sanskrit actually has a transgender, we've had a transgender tradition.
Very important in Mahabharata.
Absolutely. And even now in the Kumbh Mela, for example, there are sadhu akhadas which are transgender akhadas, right? The Kinnar Akhada, and they come and they have pride of place out there. This is part of our tradition. But no Kinnar will say that because I have come, every woman has to be removed, as as some of the transgenders are doing in the West. That's extremism, right? Or no woman will say that kill all men, and that is what feminine rights are. That's silly. It's one of the things we should not learn from the West. You can fight for your rights without hating someone else. And that to me truly shows in how Goddess Sita,
So what's the right balance?
how Goddess Durga, all are women characters. They'll be strong, but it doesn't translate into.
They will have a balance.
They will have a balance. In our way, it's always about balance. So, for example, we will believe, There are many warrior traditions in India. But you'll notice that throughout history, India has never gone outside of the subcontinent to conquer
It
other.
never invaded anyone.
Yeah, very rarely. But if someone attacks us, we'll fight back hard. So, which means balance, that we will not be so non-violent that anyone can come and walk all over us, but we'll not be so
We've always
violent that we're going
absorbed all
around the
that.
world looking for a fight. Yeah. Same with feminism, same with transgender rights, same with environment. Like, for example, we Indians are natural environmentalists because for us, nature is not a resource to be exploited, it's a goddess to be worshipped. But that doesn't mean that I will keep my poor people poor forever to save some 48 trees. We have to find some balance, right?
Yeah.
That comes intuitively in the Indian way, and goddess Sita shows that in the way she is a strong woman without hating men.
So, what's the lesson for modern women from this story? And I'm going to come to some other characters as well, and might throw in a bit of Draupadi as well into this.
Yeah.
But leaving that aside for a second.
I think the lesson is the lesson from goddess Sita is not just for women. I think it's for all of us.
All of us.
That we should
Absolutely.
stand up for our rights, but without extremism. Because
And she
what
was
happens
fearless.
is
She was
if you do
absolutely
extremism,
despite being abducted and despite everything,
exactly,
he
because
stood
Cyril,
her ground in Ashok Vatika.
yeah, because Cyril, if you yourself are extremist, you have to understand you'll create extremism on the other side as well, right? There's a reason why, I always say that in India, the left wing extremists and the right wing extremists, Ram Banai Jodi, they're made for each other. Whereas most of us centrists, to them, would tell them, dude, calm down, right? And if you become extremist while standing up for your own rights, you have to realize it's a matter of time, few years, few decades, when a reaction will arise to you,
Yeah.
to your extremism, which will also be extremist, which is happening in the West now. You see,
That circle will continue.
because it just keeps, it's a pendulum which just keeps swinging. The only way to stop this pendulum swinging is be balanced. Yeah. Like in the West, I find I'm saying this with all calmness and and having lived in the West, I support transgender rights, but I find that parts of the transgender movement, in their hatred for women, are frankly extremist, right? Uh, but this is kind of like a reaction emerging from feminist extremism, which
The
was a
balance has
reaction
been
to
broken.
men extremism. We have to balance ourselves.
So, would you say that Sita is a grossly misunderstood figure?
There
Because
are,
of the stereotypes that we've been trained to think of?
yeah, because look, goddess Sita and goddess Draupadi represent different archetypes of women. There's an ancient text called the Panchakanya, where many, 5 great women, their characters have been studied. In that, Draupadi is there, Ahalya, Mandodari, there is, it's a very ancient text. Goddess Sita was a kind of feminism which was.
Mandodari as well. And I think that in one of your books, there is a conversation between Sita and Mandodari as well. Maybe can you sort of share a bit of.
So the thing is that goddess Sita was a kind of feminism which is a calmer, quieter feminism. Like there are men who are strong men, but are the silent, calmer type, right? Draupadi ji was a kind of feminism which was a front foot, aggressive feminism. Like there are kinds of men who are strong men who are front foot, aggressive. The kind of men who will shout and scream, and they're strong. But not every man who shouts and screams is strong. Sometimes that shouting and screaming is a cover for
reflection
actually
of
deep insecurities.
Yes.
And there are some strong men who are actually calm. They're strong. They will fight for themselves, but they don't raise their voice, right? They talk in a different way. Just a look from them would probably be enough.
Enough.
They just, and goddess Sita and Draupadi ji are actually in that same way. It's a different
But
kind
they're
of.
very different. They're very different.
Very different. But you notice even with Draupadi ji, there's no hatred for men. So she will be very front foot and aggressive with those who hurt her and her family, like with Dushasan, like with Duryodhan. But that doesn't translate into a general hatred for all men. She never had that. So it was aggressive, but not extremist. And again, that's what balance means.
So let me come back to now more 2024 context. on particularly on the Ayodhya temple. Again, I want to avoid making this either religious or political. But I believe, and I think so do many, and I'd love to get your perspective, that it was a very important, almost civilizational moment for India. Is that an overstatement, or what do you feel about it? Is that it effectively unknotted an age-old problem that has been kind of there for centuries? There are many societies that are struggling with it. In the Middle East, we can see these are centuries-old conflicts which they're just unable to resolve. We have finally resolved one of the most critical knots in our history. And again, I'm not taking any sides on this, but it is a civilizational moment as we look upon it. So, your thoughts on this, and you were there, so you would have felt the.
Yeah, I would say it is a civilizational moment, and it's interesting that you spoke of the Middle East, because I'd written an article. Societies which are suffering from a form of post-traumatic stress disorder, which is, and both the Middle East and India have suffered on this. I think one of the mistakes our establishment historians made is that they called what was the Turkic colonial rule the Islamic rule, right? They didn't call the British colonial rule the Christian rule. Why are they calling the Turkic colonial rule the Islamic rule? Because it's not that Indian Muslims were ruling. Indian Muslims were as oppressed as Indian Hindus. There's a Pasmanda Muslim scholar called Faiz Ahmad. You should read his works on, because the invaders, what we call the Delhi Sultans and Mughals, were actually Turks, right? They were from Central Asia. They didn't look like Ranbir Singh or Prithviraj Kapoor. To us, they would have looked Chinese because they had Mongoloid features. They were from Central Asia. They didn't speak Urdu. Urdu is our language, right? They would have spoken Turkic or Persian, which most Indians wouldn't have understood. We wouldn't understand what they're saying, right? It was a foreign colonial rule, and it was a very brutal rule. An American historian had said that the Turkic colonial rule was perhaps one of the bloodiest of India. The invasion was perhaps one of the bloodiest invasions in human history. Will Durant, the American historian, had said this. Now, the same invaders who came to India, by the way, went to the Middle East as well, who destroyed the high point of Arab culture, the Abbasids. It was actually the same Turkic and Mongol invaders who came to India, went there as well. And they destroyed, much of the Arab world. They took it over. They became the rulers. You'll find intriguing that the first Turkic dynasties, both in the Middle East and India, were called the slave dynasties, right? Because they were slave soldiers of Mongol generals, right? The Mamluks in Egypt. Mamluk is actually Turkic for slave. And they were very brutal. The Arabs suffered as much for nearly 800 years because the Turks did massive crimes on them, including the Ottomans, and then the Europeans took over and did further massive crimes on them. India suffered the same as well. Now, there are two ways to reacting to post-traumatic stress. One is unfocused hatred, right? As I see in some parts of the Middle East, in some parts of the Arab world, because they know they've suffered so much.
Live today.
Yeah, there's this unfocused hatred on everyone else, and particularly against the Turks and the Europeans. And another way of handling post-traumatic stress disorder is denial. यार हमारे साथ तो कुछ हुआ ही नहीं. No, it was all hunky-dory. But that's also a form of coping with post. And India was the perfect example of that. That nothing happened, which is not true. And the best way to handle, and you don't need a psychologist to tell you, the best way to handle post-traumatic stress disorder: speak the truth about what happened, then forgive and move on. Okay? And realize that someone today has nothing to do with what happened 500,000 years ago. Like, we can speak calmly about what Winston Churchill did. Winston Churchill, in my mind, was as much of a criminal as Hitler was. But I will respect the right of a British person to respect Winston Churchill, because for the UK, he was a hero. But for Indians, he killed 4 million Indians in a man-made famine that he practically ordered, right? In the Great Bengal famine of 1942. But that doesn't mean I should hate today's British for it. What have they done, right? So when we speak calmly and make peace with it, that's what, in fact, actually this temple represents. And one of the things I love most, Cyril, about it is that the way it was done, because it went through a court process, when
Process.
evidence
We
was
dealt with it under our constitution.
exactly, evidence was presented, it went through a judicial process. You're among the finest lawyers, if not the finest lawyer in India, so you would know the quality of the evidence that was presented, that there was indeed a temple out there. Because of that, you'll find uh, that it wasn't unlike the Hagia Sophia mosque conversion in Turkey, which has led to a lot of dissonance. Even the Pope issued a statement, if you remember, at that
Yes.
time. Whereas in this, Irfan Saab, who was one of the litigants, who was one of the Muslim litigants, actually wanted to come and do darshan of Lord
Yes.
Ram, because even he accepted the evidence, what he saw in court, right? So when you go through a process like this, which is longer and harder, but the truth comes out, in a way, it's like the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And my thing to it would be that we should accept the terrible crimes that happened in the past, realize that
Talk
actually,
about it.
yeah, talk about it, realize that actually 95, maybe 99% of Indian Muslims are actually descendants of Indian Hindus and Buddhists. They have nothing to do with those invaders,
Forward.
right? Uh, and then move on from this. And what I like most, I'm making a documentary on this subject, Cyril, which is
Yes.
actually
Big
releasing
release.
on
Yeah,
Jan
I'd
25th.
like a preview. Send me the link. Where is it
Yeah,
going to be aired?
it's 25th January at 7:30 p.m. on
But
NDTV,
on
all channels across the world.
So by the time
We
this
had,
episode is aired, it would have already come out.
yeah, but it will get read again and again. I think it'll be
Yes.
there on Geo also,
Yes.
which will be on demand. There's a group in Rajasthan, Cyril, called the Manganyar Muslims. They are Namazi
Yes.
Muslims.
Yes.
But their vocation for centuries is that they sing devotional ballads to bhajans to Lord Ram. They're Muslims, and we recorded them in the
Yes.
temple, right, singing out there. And this to me shows India. This truly shows all of us coming together, which is why I think this can be a very important
That's
moment. It can be a
civilization.
moment of unity. And this all Hindus and Muslims, and I say this, I've never hidden the fact I'm a very proud Hindu. But I've also said publicly often in my puja room at home, I have marks and symbols of all gods and all religions. And this is the
Yeah.
Indian way.
The
I
thing
worship
is
all of
that
them.
I have a family home in the hills and we have a forest there.
Ah,
And in that forest, we have put up statues of every religion.
absolutely.
Whoever
This
comes
is
to
the
the
Indian
house,
way.
we follow them.
Yeah, and this is the Indian way. And
Yeah.
we must be clear that if we want India to take its rightful place in the comity of nations that it had for most of human history, all 1.4 billion of us must be united. Uh, that it doesn't matter what religion you practice, what community you're from, what region you're from, what language you speak. If you're an Indian, you're one of us. We
I think
must be
this
very clear on
creates
that.
a lot of interesting dynamics north-south as well.
Abs-
Because one of the things which was evident is that the Ramayana has not only is a North India concept, but it is running all the way down to
Absolutely.
south. I think there will
Absolutely.
be an awakening there as well.
And in a way, Lord Ram unites everyone from
Yes.
tribal communities to
Yeah.
backward caste to scheduled caste to upper caste Hindus to Muslims to I gave the example of Manganyar Muslims, Irfan Saab. And this must be a moment of unity, and I think that's what Lord Ram would expect from us as well.
So, in conclusion, just to wind up the episode, it has been a fascinating conversation. We can go on and on for hours. But I want to sort of pick a line from your first book, The Immortals of Meluva, and it stands the test of time. I think you've said that a person's ethics and character are not tested in good times, but it is only in bad times that a person shows how steadfast he is to his dharma. I think this has great relevance to all of us in the corporate and business world as well. So, Amish, drawing from your knowledge in history and mythology, what are some of the things that you would advise a lot of my young listeners today and professionals to keep in mind they chart their life journey.
One thing I would say is how you look at time will mold what decisions you take. If you're focused only on the next day, you just want to have a good time, go drink, go do something silly, you'll think differently. If you're thinking about just the next quarter, you'll think differently. If you're thinking about the next 5 years, 10 years, you'll think differently. If you're thinking about the next 20, you'll think differently. You'll think about how you should behave with your family. You'll think about how you should behave with your wife or husband. You'll think differently if you're thinking of 20 years, because you'll be a little, it automatically brings balance in. If you're very short term oriented, you tend to take shortcuts. How you look at time is very critical. It's one of the things that used to come down to us from our ancient traditions. That, of course, be present in the here and now, but don't lose sight of
The long.
the
And
long
I think
term.
the Indian
Keeps you
thinking has, I think, is very good at this.
absolutely.
Because the
That's
way we
one.
do time.
Yeah. Secondly, having a concept of dharma, it's much more easier to follow than principles, because if you often like if you have a principle like you should be non-violent at all times, which is a good principle to follow. But what happens if five of the guys in your office are walking down the road and they see a woman being attacked? Should they stick to that non-violence at all time, or should the five of them go and fight and try and save her? Right? It depends on the situation. So
Context, yeah.
which is where the concept of dharma comes in. That don't think of regulations, think of principles that you must follow, and be balanced in them. That automatically brings out the right choices at that point in time. And the third thing to realize is, if you make a choice, you have to live with the consequences, positive or negative. Be conscious of that and then make a choice, right? You can't blame anyone else, and you can't turn back time. Like I have made decisions in my life, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Some of them I think were good decisions. Some of the choices I might regret. It's a waste of time. I took a choice. I
That's
made
over.
it depending on what I knew at that point of time. Now I have to live with the consequences. And then I can make further choices. There's no point wasting time, regretting things. There's
There's
no
no rear view mirror, as I said.
exactly. And there's no point worrying about fate. You can't control fate. You can control how you behave, right? So focus on yourself. I think these are the three suggestions I would give.
That's fascinating. So, Amish, this has been an incredible conversation, and hopefully the first of many more. We'd love to have you over in the firm as well. And thank you very much for this very befitting conversation for the special occasion of Women's Day, and we celebrate Women's Day every year.
Nice.
We have someone like you come and talk to us, because it's a not so well kept secret of our success that the women of this firm are those who are actually driving the engine, and we celebrate their success. And I think today's conversation is a form of that celebration. So thank you, Amish, for
Thank you.
being with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.